My name is Sarah Perrott. I'm the Associate Director here at the Faraday, and I'm delighted to introduce our speaker for today, who is a visitor at the Faraday this month and also a visiting scholar at St. Edmund's University. Ben is usually at Yale. He's professor of internal medicine and pediatrics at the Yale School of Medicine and also professor of religion and health at the Yale Divinity School. And he directs the Yale program for medicine, spirituality, and religion. And as he's both a practicing physician and an ordained minister, he writes and speaks widely about the intersection of these domains. So without further ado, I would like you to give us your talk.
Okay, the topic today, cancer, immortality, and Christology, the legacy of Henrietta Lacks. So first, let me ask the gang here, who has read the book, The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks? Okay, so one person out of the hundreds here. The people online, they don't know how many people are here. So one person. How about who has heard the name Henrietta Lacks? Okay, so maybe about half. Okay, and I'll take that the rest of you maybe have never even heard of who Henrietta Lacks is and what her legacy might be. Great, because we're going to start at the beginning. So the beginning is an important part of this talk is the handsome fellow on the screen there. No, not me, the other guy. So this is Mark Heim. So one of my roles at Yale is I co-teach this vibrant, cool graduate seminar at the Yale Divinity School called Theology and Medicine. And I co-teach it with Mark Heim, who's a theologian. And we've been doing this for 5 or 6 years now. And we actually teach this, the legacy of Henrietta Lacks in our seminar. And we've written a paper about this. And he is my buddy in all of these, issues around theology and medicine in this class. So he is back at Yale doing the hard work of teaching this class while I am here on triennial leave, hanging out with y'all. Okay, but my main gig at Yale is I'm a residency program director, and I'm the director of a full-on busy primary care practice. So my main role is to teach and to see patients. And so this is my gang at our welcoming picnic. So it's, I am an internist, I'm a pediatrician, I attend on the hospital floors, the newborn nursery, in the outpatient setting. And I have the joy of shepherding just the finest physicians in the country, in the world, and encouraging them to become the best doctors they can be. And dare I say, even the best people that they can be. I mean, it's not, the medicine is easy. Everything else is hard. And then we know that. So that's the real joy of what I do. And then look at this guy. So I've been in the ministry since 1991. And the picture of the handsome fellow there, not that guy, the other guy. No, but that's what I looked like when I started. So the smile is the same, but we're a little thinner on top. So I've been in the ministry for a long time, preaching, doing the work of the church, and the church I serve is Pilgrim Congregational Church, which is in the community. It's not connected to Yale at all. It's a wonderful, wonderful corner of New Haven, Connecticut, and I'm there as a part-time pastor because I have a day job as a professor. So that's who I am. Preaching on Sunday, seeing patients, teaching, and all that stuff. So that's who I am, and I look forward to hearing more about the stories of what brings you to this room. So let's talk about what we're going to wrestle with today. So the story of Henrietta Lacks has all kinds of ethical issues that are taught in medical schools. But there are also deeply philosophic questions and theologic questions. And so I invite us to think about these things and how they might impact the wider church and how they might inform the ongoing dialogue of medicine and religion, and even maybe our understanding of God and Jesus. And through the lens of Jesus, maybe understand and heighten the legacy of Henrietta Lacks. So this is her story. This is who she is. She's a Black American woman born in 1920 in the countryside of the state of Maryland, which is a southern state in America. It was formerly a slave state. And after the Civil War, there were sharecroppers, mostly Black American sharecroppers, and the legacy of that carried forth into Henrietta Lacks, where she worked as a laborer on a tobacco farm as a young child. At the age of 21, she married. She moved to the outskirts of Baltimore, Maryland. And at the age of 31, 10 years later, she felt a knot in her lower abdomen. And so she presented to the Johns Hopkins University Hospital, which is, to this day, one of the preeminent medical institutions in America, in the world. And so she presented there. She was diagnosed with cervical cancer. And there's some debate about if she received appropriate treatment or not, but she did receive treatment. She received radiation therapy. The rods of radiation were placed in her cervix, but she died 8 months later. And a focused postmortem showed that she had widely disseminated cervical cancer. So that was her story. She was, no one knew her story until the publication of the book, The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks, came out in 2010. Now, what makes her such a compelling story for us today? Well, in the course of her care, a sample of her cancer cells were sent to the lab. And just as if today, when a tumor would be excised or a biopsy would be taken, a portion went to the lab for diagnosis, but a portion also went to a researcher who was doing research on cancer. And interestingly, surprisingly, her cells did not die. Her cells, her cancer cells, continued to replicate and replicate and replicate and replicate. And for those of you who know about cancer, that's the problem with cancer. The problem with cancer is that the cells do not regulate themselves. They do not apoptose. They do not downregulate. The cancer is uncontrolled cell growth. But usually when you take this biopsy and you put it in a petri dish, well, they're just like every other cell. And eventually the cells die. But not so with Henrietta Lacks. So the researcher took the cells, cultured them, discovered this amazing property that they continued to replicate, that they did not die. And as was the case at that time, the researcher, passed them to his neighbor and passed them over to another colleague, and then even put some in a test tube and mailed them off across the country for free, because that was what the scientific community did at the time. To foster the ongoing collaboration and research, you passed around your best material. And so her cells were called HeLa cells, the first two initials of her name, Henrietta Lacks, HeLa. Henrietta Lacks, HeLa cells. So we lose her name in the course of this. And so initially, these cells were passed around freely as part of the goodwill of the scientific community. And then because they were so special because the cells replicated ad infinitum, a nonprofit company was formed because they just needed to institutionalize this somewhat because the cells were going all over the world. Well, then, the cells were used for-profit enterprises. So then companies started to make money from HeLa cells. And so here we are. Her cells have replicated so much that more than 50 million metric tons of HeLa cells have existed in the world from 1950. That there are more than 60,000 papers, peer-reviewed journal articles that have been published based on the HeLa cells. There have been 7 people who won the Nobel Prize from their work with HeLa cells. And the scientific advances from HeLa cells are innumerable. But some notable ones include many, many vaccines that have saved the lives of millions of people. Paul Sabin, the polio vaccine, some of you guys might be familiar with that. So the Sabin vaccine was derived directly from the HeLa cells. Flu vaccine, HPV vaccine, multiple cancer therapeutics, multiple questions around genetics, the pathophysiology of even common bacterial infections, salmonella, typhus, all used HeLa cells in their research. And so people built scientific careers off HeLa cells. Companies made millions, billions from the work of HeLa cells. Nobel Prize winners, academic careers, and on and on and on and on and on. And all of this from this anonymous Black American tobacco farmer who did not really give consent for her cells to be used for scientific research. They were just taken and used the way it was done in 1950 at Johns Hopkins University Hospital and other places. So there are multiple ethical issues. This book is in the curriculum of many, many medical schools around the country, around the world. And in fact, it was the book for last year's Cambridge Book Festival, yes? So there are many, many issues. One is this issue of consent. Did she give consent? And the debate goes back and forth. In 1950s, did they really do consent? Probably not. Did she give consent? Well, probably not in the way, certainly not in the way we give consent for medical procedures and donations to science. There are all kinds of issues around racism and power. A Black American goes to one of the most powerful medical establishments in the country for care. Did she get appropriate care? That's debatable. It's debatable. And then these bigger questions happen. Who owns your DNA? Does Henrietta Lacks own her DNA? Is it part of the family estate? Can you patent a DNA sequence? Companies are making billions of dollars. Is the family owed any money? And how does that happen? The debate has gone on and on and on for more than 70 years. And some of the pushback was, well, how do you figure out Lax's estate and who gets what? And if Henrietta Lax's estate gets money, does everybody who ever donated anything to science start getting reimbursed for these patents and these medical innovations? How does that even work? And is it the DNA itself, or is it the technology that keeps the cells alive and the technology that founded the vaccines and the chemotherapeutics? How does it all work? Well, very complex, right? So the family just settled this past summer, 2023. So she died in 1950, and the family just settled in 2023. So what's that, 73 years later? She died at 31. So she would be 104 years old today. And that's a picture of the family when they they settled out of court. So we don't know the details of what the agreement was, but 2023, 73 years later, they settled the case. So I invite you to answer this question. So in thinking about issues of fairness, consent, and ethics, do you think the story of Henrietta Lacks is, and there's some choices. So I invite you to pick up your phone, get your phone, and zap the QR code. Our good friends who are online, this should work. If you're on a computer, on the bottom there, it says on pollev.com/wisdom, you can vote online in your browser, or you can use the QR code. And give me a thumbs up if you see it working. Okay, great. There. Okay. All right. So this is the interactive game show part of the talk. And as you can see, the choices are totally fair, just and right, mostly fair, just and right, perhaps a little fair, just and right, stuck in the middle, perhaps a little unfair, unjust, and wrong, mostly unfair, unjust, and wrong, totally unfair, unjust, and wrong. And so, to be fair, whatever you just decided, there are volumes and volumes of essays written that supports your position. The QR code. Okay, I'm going to go backwards. Good. Okay, not everybody did that. Good. We got some wise ones who haven't voted yet. Okay. So stuck in the middle, yeah, perhaps a little unfair, unjust, right? And it doesn't feel quite fair, does it? I mean, maybe it's fair, or maybe by the letter of the law it was fair, but there's something about it that makes us think, maybe the consent piece and the power dynamics and things weren't quite right. Okay, but it's nice to see the spread here. And one of the outcomes of Henrietta Lacks's story is that her family serves on a panel now, and they decide how the Henrietta Lacks's cells, how the HeLa cells are used in scientific research. So that's one of the outcomes of all of these decades of back and forth, and that there are several ethics seminars and lectures in her name at several medical schools in America. Johns Hopkins is one of them, Meharry is another, and there's one in the UK actually that has a statue of her and convenes lectures in her name. So based on the temperature of the room and the spread in opinion here, this is a complicated ethical issue. And if it feels warm in the room, you're right. It's about to get even more provocative and maybe even more uncomfortable. So stay tuned. Okay. So Professor Heim and I and the students that take our class have pondered this other question that came up when we were thinking about the legacy of Henrietta Lacks. In what ways is Henrietta Lacks immortal? From a Darwinian survival of the fittest model, from a purely evolutionary context, Henrietta Lacks has won the game, right? Her DNA has replicated to the tune of 50 million metric tons. Her DNA is the most fit DNA, the most robust DNA of any human ever to have lived. She has won the evolutionary game. And yet, there are some disturbing qualities to her immortality. One, she's not conscious, right? Two, she is immortal only in this scientific sense. One of the concerns the family had was that their mother was somehow being held captive in the basement, in the labs of Johns Hopkins, and they were performing medical experiments on her. It's not untrue, right? She was being held captive. Her cells were being held captive. And there's a moment where the family is brought to the lab to see the cells, to see their mother's cells in the petri dish. And they realized it wasn't quite their mother, but it was their mother. And so they began to speak to the cells as if somehow Henrietta, their mother, could hear what they were saying to her. And there was some issues around, scientific literacy and all that, but she was immortal. Her cells were replicating. Let us talk to our mother. Perhaps somehow she could hear us beyond the grave. So she's immortal, but she's not conscious. She's immortal in this postmodern reductionist mechanical sense. But as a Christian or as a faithful person, isn't it somewhat of a mockery of immortality? Maybe it's even a version of purgatory or even hell, right? To be replicating over and over and over, but never to experience heaven, God, reconciliation, forgiveness. Your cells, your DNA are replicating over and over and over. The other piece to this is that she is immortal, but they aren't her healthy cells that are immortal. They are her cancer cells that are immortal. That her immortality comes from her brokenness. Her immortality comes from the way that she was diseased. And so from a Darwinian natural selection process, we are all incorporating and contending with mutations all the time. And that the mutations, sometimes a mutation is favorable, right? Intelligence, and those genes live on, or a stronger hand grip to hang from trees, or whatever. Some mutations make us stronger. This mutation killed her. This mutation took her life, yet this mutation overcame her life. This mutation became her legacy. Disturbing, provocative. Her immortality. The other issue here is her sacrifice. That this of course is Jesus, Pantocrator from the Hagia Sophia, right? The all creator. And so in what ways is Henrietta Lacks like Jesus Christ? And by understanding who Jesus is, does that help us understand the death and sacrifice of Henrietta Lacks? And then also, in a postmodern, post-religious, very skeptical society we live in today, could Henrietta Lacks help us understand better who Jesus is. Henrietta Lacks, she died a sacrifice. She died a tragic, painful death, a death that today might not ever have happened, right? The great irony is that she died of cervical cancer, which we now know is caused by the HPV vaccine. Henrietta Lacks's cells were used to help discover the HPV vaccine. And that had she received the HPV vaccine, she may never have had cervical cancer and she would never have died from her cancer. So Henrietta Lacks's death is a sacrifice. It is a death that has saved the lives of millions and millions of people. That because of her, millions of people are alive. Millions of people have received the flu vaccine and the HPV vaccine and other vaccines. They've received cancer therapeutics, and they are alive today because of the ongoing legacy, the sacrifice of Henrietta Lacks. And in some ways, one could say that even in the realm of science, she stands for almost a Christological metaphor, if you will, right? That the scientists could say, oh, her death has saved the lives of millions. In the same way, we of the church, pastors, we're always looking for ways to translate who Jesus is to the modern world. What did Jesus do? What does his sacrifice mean? How do we understand Jesus today? Well, Jesus saves the lives of the world. Jesus saves the world. And the metaphor is that if Henrietta Lacks has saved the physical, mechanical, bodied life of these millions of people, well, Jesus saves the whole world. And not just our broken selves, but restores us unto the fullness of God. So Henrietta Lacks, I think, helps us modern, skeptic, wondering people, helps us understand the salvific power of who Jesus is. And I think seeing Henrietta Lacks through the lens of Jesus elevates who Henrietta Lacks is. That she is not just this nameless petri dish of cells, the HeLa cells, that her sacrifice means something, that because of her and her legacy, millions of people are alive. Now, the other piece to this that I find compelling is there's a Eucharistic parallel, a Eucharistic metaphor, that we believe that when we take the bread and the wine into ourselves, that we take into ourselves Jesus himself. And wherever you fall on the transubstantiation and all that, but nonetheless, the Christian liturgy is that the Eucharist strengthens us unto God, that we take Jesus into ourselves. Every time you get a flu vaccine, you take into yourself a little piece of Henrietta Lacks. Every time we approach the altar to receive the body and blood of Jesus Christ, we are strengthened unto our body and unto our spirits. And every time we go in the fall to get our flu shot, we are strengthened unto our body by a little piece of Henrietta Lacks that resides in all of us. And those are an immunofluorescent stain of the HeLa cells, in case you were wondering. So this is where I invite some discussion and some collected thoughts, because you are the people here at Cambridge that ponder these questions of religion and science. And this is uncomfortable space, I think. I found that in my life as a physician, religion is the one part that folks in medicine often feel uncomfortable about, right? So as a physician, we get trained to ask people, what kind of drugs people use, who are you having relationships with? But religion in the realm of medicine, I think still makes people uncomfortable. And let's face it, in our churches, in our religious communities, the world of science, and especially genetics and cancer and experimentation, it makes church folk uncomfortable. And so Henrietta Lacks can be a bridge between these two worlds. I think she is a symbol of where we are in the year 2023, right? She embodies the complex issues around racism and oppression and power dynamics. She models the great triumph of what happens of what science can do, all the benefits and salvific powers of modern science, and maybe also a little bit the evil empire. And then in this realm of religion and medicine, science and Henrietta Lacks and Christology, I think thinking about her as a Christologic sacrifice helps us understand Jesus, especially those people who are skeptics or wondering or pondering. And I think seeing Henrietta Lacks through a Christologic lens helps elevate what she has done for the world. So, friends, there we are. I invite comments, thoughts, discussion. To be fair, I'm not done thinking about this, and invite wisdom and kind comments from you all. And there's someone, 1, 2, 3, and then we'll take a question from the panel. Go ahead. And if you don't mind, speak your name and what brought you here.
So thank you for your talk. It is difficult to take it all in. We'll gradually try to think about it. My name is Urmila. My question is simple. What was different have they found now? Why these cells only replicated and nobody else's cells replicate? So, what is it that have made her stand out so much in science?
Yeah. So, one of the beautiful things about being a minister at a medical school and a physician at a divinity school is I'm never the smartest person in the room ever. Actually, I don't know if I said that right. Yeah, or what? So I don't know. That's the long-winded professorial answer. I have no idea, right? I don't know. I'll just leave it at that. Okay, you go ahead.
Thanks very much for your talk. That was really interesting. So I'm part of the Faraday Institute team myself. Can you comment on the lack of willingness amongst Christians in particular to get the COVID vaccine? Do you think there are some similar things going on here? Do you think it's a sort of distrust of Christians in science?
Woof. Whoa, I thought it was hot in here before, and now we're going to talk about religion and the COVID vaccine. So I wonder if, in America, I think the COVID vaccine became so politicized so quickly, and it was really hard to see past the politics, which honestly, I don't even think it was that religious, at least in America. It seems like, it's funny, religion is also reasonable. And so when things stop being reasonable, it makes me think, oh, it's no longer about religion. It's about ego or politics or turf. So, because let's be honest about what happened. In less than a year, we figured out a completely novel way to create this new vaccine. And we know it worked, that fewer people died because of the COVID vaccine. And if you got COVID and you had the vaccine, you were much, much less likely to die. And that's just the truth. Now, very rarely, there were a few side effects, but those were magnified in great disproportion to how many millions of people were saved. So, I just don't think it was a religious issue. I think it got so politicized in America, at least. Let's see, it was you, and then maybe we'll take one from the table, and it's nice that people are interested. So we'll get to everybody.
I'm thinking about the parallels that you were drawing. I wonder if another parallel that might be possible to draw might be thinking about what was mentioned about the unique nature of, or the nature of Henrietta Lacks's cancer. My understanding is that this was one of the first, if not the first, cell line. This was a breakthrough in being able to have cells in the lab that multiplied and became a cell line. This was the first. That was the thing. And actually, they're so virulent in how they replicate. My PhD supervisor wouldn't have them in the lab because they just got everywhere. Right. If it was the first cell line, thinking of Jesus, if Jesus is not just a savior of individuals, but a historic moment in God's relationship with the world that was bringing his people back to himself, is it possibly thinking of Henrietta Lacks as a historic moment of kicking off a field of cell biology, essentially? She's a very significant individual with a horrible cancer that killed her very quickly, but that was a unique moment in time. Ooh. There's another parallel that one could draw, that people who would hold a more sort of kingdom theology view might be happier with.
Oh, yeah. Right. Little Karl Rahner, the cross and
anti-right type.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So that it was that Henrietta Lacks sort of spawned this rich new era of life. Right. And you raise a really important point that I didn't mention in the talk, that one way the family realized that her cells were still ongoing was they were so virulent, or not, that's the wrong word, but they would replicate so well, and that they would contaminate other cell lines in the lab. And so to figure out what was Henrietta Lacks's cells and what was other cells, scientists needed DNA from her family. So they reached out to her family to say, oh, we need blood samples to figure out your grandmother's cell lines. And they said, like, what is happening? And then that spawned the whole thing and spawned the book. Yeah, super interesting point. Let's take one from the chat group.
So first question, in what way is physical immortality like Henrietta similar to spiritual immortality, like legacy of great persons in history? If Christians truly believe in the common destiny of human beings, are the concepts of consent, privacy, powers, and so on only social constructs that stand in the way of salvation?
In what way is physical immortality like Henrietta Lacks similar to spiritual immortality like legacy? So I'm going to take that question first, because I think that one's actually easy. Because, I mean, one aspect of this whole legacy that's so compelling to me is that she's immoral, but in a way that makes a mockery of the Christian idea of immortality, right? Like and one thing that's fascinating about the religious life is that it takes imagination, right? That to be religious means we have to have some kind of imagination of what life would be like after death with God, because it hasn't been well described in the Bible, right? And so immortality with God, or eternity with God, is the fulfillment of joy, right? And I love the medieval version of the celestial spheres, and that there are angels all singing, and the hymns rise up to God, and that's why the hymn "Holy, Holy, Holy" is the reason why it's three holies, is that there were 9 levels. And so one angel would sing holy and say holy to the next angel, and it would go up, holy, 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 holy. So it takes imagination in the religious life, and that we believe that we will know our joy and our pleasure and our peace in God's love, that we will celebrate and worship in the presence of God. That version of immortality, eternity, seems to me completely different than this immortality where you're completely materialized and disconnected, not only from joy, but disconnected from consciousness. And that in a critique of modernity, right, where we've become so materialistic and so reductionistic, where Henrietta Lacks's version of immortality, to me at least, is like a mockery of immortality. If anything, it gives us a vision of what we don't want immortality to be like. And we could maybe even take the Petri dish and just flip it upside down and say, I want that. I want everything that is not that. I want eternal life and joy and consciousness. I don't want to be in an agar plate in some lab. So that was the easy one. If Christians truly believe in the common destiny of human beings, are the concepts of consent, privacy, powers, etc., only social constructs that stand in the way of salvation? Woo! I'm not sure if I even understand the question, but I think, I think privacy matters, right? And that there's a difference between something that's private and something that is secret, right? Sometimes we keep things private because of the personal nature of them. And I think, especially in healthcare, I mean, think about, would you want people to know your cholesterol? Think, oh, quite a lot of mayonnaise on that sandwich you ate this morning, right? Like privacy, consent. We need to consent to live. I mean, part of that is our innate power over our own destinies, right? We must choose our path. We have free will. So I think those things are important. And so I don't know if they stand in the way of salvation as much as they're part of the reality we must navigate as we consider our salvation. And that came from, okay, got it. All right, that was probably not a great answer to those very complicated questions. Let's go back to the live audience. Rodney.
I'm going to take you into perhaps even more controversial territory. Going back to the COVID vaccine issue. Now, I think there were some people who had a problem within the Christian world because tissue from aborted fetuses had been used, right? And now maybe there's a parallel here, aborted fetuses, immortality, and so on. I don't know, but there are ethical issues that are raised by that. And so I just wonder what your comment is.
Thanks. So I might punt that question to our Roman Catholic colleagues, because I believe the Pope actually came down to say that the COVID vaccine, however, in that lens of how tissues were used on on balance, we'll say, our colleague, the Pope came down to say that it was okay for Catholics to use this vaccine. So I might just defer to more celebrated, learned people than myself. Woo, okay. And the last time I get invited to speak at Faraday. Okay. Michael? Yeah, hi, Michael.
Thank you very much. Very interesting talk. I was just wondering, how would you see, so one thing that I might be struggling with when it comes to this question is, to what degree should we acknowledge, or if Christ is our Lord, to what degree can we say that we own our own bodies? So what seemed to strike me in this case is that unless you can claim that somehow we are autonomous beings who, in that sense, have some sort of right over our own bodies and cells. But if as Christians we believe that Christ is our maker and ultimately creator of ourselves, wouldn't that have implications on so what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah. Boy, this is a tough crowd here. I feel like I'm sitting for a PhD defense or ordination defense. So one of the great, let me just say, who's the philosopher? There's a philosopher here. So this is why religion is so great and philosophy can be so vexing, because philosophy, everything has to be logical, right? Religion, we love in religion to hold disparate ideas so close together, like the same poles of a magnet, And so one of the beautiful mysteries of the Christian faith is the incarnation, right? Jesus is fully God and fully human. And we enjoy the kingdom of heaven already and not yet, right? Like we can have a foretaste of heaven right now in our lives and also know that there is something else coming. And so I wonder if, we are given these lumpy piles of sinew and bone and flesh, and there's blood coursing through our veins. And this is the vessel of our consciousness, right? And in Christianity, we hold those things in tension, right? It's not like we think the spirit is more important than the body or the body's more important than the spirit. We are one. And we believe that because we believe that Jesus is the Son of God who came into this reality to save us. So I appreciate that. That sounds like so blasé. I appreciate that, but I appreciate it as a physician because it means this broken person in front of me, my patient, right? That is a worthy enterprise. That's a worthy calling to seek healing and repair of a broken body, right? That's part of our mission as Christians, right? And at the same time, recognize that healing is more than the healing of the body, right? And all the healings in the New Testament are always linked to this faith conversion, which is so rich. I don't know if I answered your question. I answered probably another question, but I hope that got close to the what you were saying. Let's go to the chat online.
So here's the question. You said she is immortal because of her brokenness, and this is one story which can be told. One could also say she's immortal because she is useful, or she is immortal because people go to great lengths in time and money and care to keep her alive. And these are also true. Could you comment on how we select the stories we tell?
Yeah, I'm looking at, she's immortal because of her brokenness. One could also say she is immortal because she is useful. She is immortal because people go to great lengths in time and money and care to keep her alive. And these are also true. Could you comment on how we select the stories we tell? Whoa. I have not thought about that, Mike. I have not thought about that. That in some ways, that line, she is immortal because she is useful, that I think further commodifies her cells, I think, right? Like if you're not useful, if her cells were not useful, they would have petered out on that Petri dish in 1950. And so it does make her, that utilitarian idea, it does make it somewhat more distasteful, I think, that she's been even further monetized and commodified. And she's immortal because people go to great lengths to keep her alive. I mean, that further heightens this idea of victimization, I think. And these also are true. Could you comment on how we select the stories we tell? I think those are wise thoughts. I got to think more about that. I think we all have to think more about that. You had your hand up for a long time.
In an undergraduate philosophy degree, usually you encounter the question of personal identity pretty early on. And this is going to be coming up in a lot of my teaching whenever I do that. So thank you. My question is quite a basic one about what relation you think there is between these cells and Henrietta. So just to motivate the thought, you showed us an image of a fella standing by a photo of a fella with longer hair than you.
Yeah, right.
And you said, that's me. If I cut my hair off, maybe my hair was part of me yesterday, is it still part of me today? These questions of persistence through time are related to questions of part-whole relations through time. And for what it's worth, there's a discussion right now in analytic theology and Christology, Oliver Crisp talking, what does it mean to be in Adam? What does it mean to be in Christ? And he's talking about four-dimensional temporal parts being all part of a mereological sum. I could go on, but the simple question is, what would you say is the relation between Henrietta and these parts of Henrietta? Or
This is another great opportunity to just say, I'm just a pastor. I'm just a doc. Because when you, I think yes, I'll just say yes. The beautiful thing about that question is that first it sounded like an easy question, but then I quickly realized it was not an easy question because clearly they are her cells, right? There's still a relation from her to her embodied personhood from when she died. But is it become something else? Probably yes, right?